Hello and happy Monday. Welcome to our Q&A for our virtual Copper Conference panel session on future material intelligence. I'm Ernest Scheyder with Reuters, and I'm joined by an expert group of panelists that you just heard from who've got a lot to talk about today. We've got a few sort of general introductory questions for me, and then we're going to toss it over to you, the audience. So we know time is tight, so we're going to jump right in. I want to start with Christina. Thanks for your great presentation. One of the things that the copper industry right now is, I think, wary of or looking at in general is sort of the higher cost and what that does for demand. Can you talk about how substitution is expected to develop in this higher cost environment and how that might affect demand moving forward?
Of course, substitution is one way of balancing the market because it reduces demand for copper. But the substitution is not that easy and not that homogeneous across all applications. For example, there are some applications where substitution is relatively straightforward, like power cables, like architecture applications, while other applications, they have limited exposure to substitution, like equipment wire and foil application, electrical plate sheets, strips and foils. In this latter one, we don't expect much substitution happening, even if the copper price is increasing. Some other applications have already very advanced substitution, like plumbing tubes. And here we will expect the impact of the higher copper material costs facilitating substitution only to a limited extent. And there's also other applications where substitution reach the technical limits, and the new research and development is required to move on and substitute further. And of course, this research and development is not only into alternative materials, but also in miniaturization, that meaning using copper more efficiently. So we will see a different impact of the higher material cost. We will see in some applications higher substitution, in other application the substitution will be less pronounced than in these first applications.
And what's the potential substitute? Is it aluminum in all cases, or is it several different options?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry, Ernest.
I said, and what is the potential substitute? Would it be aluminum in all cases, or would it be others?
It's also different materials. This can be also steel, aluminum, plastics. It depends on the applications, and also sometimes also composite materials. It depends on that. But of course, in electrical applications, is aluminum is a key competing material. Gotcha.
Thank you, Christina. Luke, jumping to you. Great presentation, especially on the EV market right now. 2020 was a rough year for a lot of people, I think for all of us, it's fair to say, but wondering why you think electric car sales actually increased in 2020 and what that says about copper moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So we estimate electric car sales increased by about 40% year on year in 2020. A lot of this is policy driven, and a lot of that was underpinned by Europe. So Europe has a really tough policy for automakers of the 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer for cars. 2020 was a transition year towards that. This year is the first year that it's fully enforced. But as a result, in Europe, we saw automakers try and reach that target. So a massive increase in HEVs, plug-in hybrids, and also battery electric vehicles. So that was a really strong driver, not to mention that some countries like France and Germany also included electric cars in their stimulus packages and increased purchase subsidies to help weather some of the additional costs. And then if we look at other markets globally, so China, again, very, very strong on policy. They've got their purchase subsidy, which is going on through next year, and new energy vehicle credits as well. And then in the US, which is less focused or was less strong on policy in 2020 and earlier, sales of Tesla's Model Y really boosted the market in the second half of the year after lockdowns. So across the top three auto markets there, we saw lots of growth in Europe and then modest growth in China and the US. which led to an overall quite substantial increase in 2020.
And on policy, you mentioned in your presentation, Luke, that China is moving from a bit of a carrot to a stick, that is moving from a financial incentive to almost really prodding OEMs to have more EV cars in their lineup. How do you see that affecting copper long term? I mean, that it really is, as I say, carrot to stick, so it would seem to spike demand.
Yeah, so I think that type of policy transition is very effective. So this China moving from the purchase subsidy, which is being phased out, I think stepped down about 10% a year, and ending next year, at the end of next year. That moving to new energy vehicle credits is a real powerful driver for electric vehicle uptake. And that transition is a real powerful driver. And so along with that, we're going to see more inverters, more motors and batteries, all which have contained copper. And that's going to have quite a positive impact on copper demand overall.
Gotcha. Thanks, Luke. Peter, do you have a comment on Luke, or?
It's just a little comment on China.
Sure.
I've been reading about the mandate for manufacturers having to produce an increasingly hard performance from their vehicles. And I've seen some views saying that there may even be a reduction in the number of cars produced in China up to about 2030. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that one.
A reduction in the overall number of cars in China.
Well, no, actually, it'll be a reduction in the growth of the electric vehicle sales. So they're going up like that, and they'll go just slightly less slow. There'll be a bit of a kink in them, rather like the COVID crisis.
I mean, overall, I think China's heading in one direction. It's very focused on electrification. And yeah, it's new energy vehicle credits and purchase subsidies have historically been founded on some very complex rules that have multipliers with range and energy density of batteries and things. And the performance targets are hard to meet. This is one of the reasons why Tesla, for example, is switching to LFP batteries for its Model 3 instead of continuing with NMC. It's low cost, and it's just not taking any of those incentives because it can't meet some of the performance requirements. But overall, I think long term that China's heading in one direction with electrification, and that it's going to be solid for the future of electric car sales in the country.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Peter, you actually sort of was a nice entry point into a question for you. Your presentation focused a lot on cars and light vehicles, but sort of wondering, what about trucks, buses, etc.?
Okay, yes, our project was really looking at the broad brush of the major trends, big sort of millions of tons of copper. And so we did cover trucks and buses briefly, but not in so much. I think the thing to say immediately is that there are 100 million cars, there are 3.5 million trucks, and 0.03 million buses, and 59 million 2- and 3-wheelers, which are in target for being turned into electric. And so obviously the cars are just a massively larger number than the other ones. Put against that, the trucks tend to use about 3 times as much copper when they're electrified as cars on average. The 2- and 3-wheelers obviously use a very small amount. And the trucks and buses, particularly the trucks where they have fixed routes or areas, are certainly more active in the hydrogen side, the hydrogen fuel cells, which are electrified, of course, but they may or may not use copper, which is just an interesting question to pose later on. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you, Peter. Louise, I want to turn to you. Major props for your background, very on brand. So thank you for that and your great presentation on urban mining. I think everyone's got a stack of old cell phones in their closet. So the concept of urban mining is one that I think we can all lob onto. We're seeing some new laws in different domiciles around the world. The EU, for instance, is having a law that would force household appliance manufacturers to design appliances to be repairable and to last a minimum of 10 years. How is this going to have an effect on urban mining, do you think, moving forward?
So thanks for that, Ernest. Well, what all of those, say, life extension measures for appliances or for cars or for whatever contains copper will, of course, limit the amount of discards that are available for recycling every year. But at the same time, they also limit the amount of copper required for replacing them. So the whole system of the whole idea of the circular economy is to do, to keep those materials in the economic system as long as possible. And a lot of the measures, they aim at extending the life of the products, but at the very end, the products will be discarded. And therefore, that's where urban mining comes in, where recycling chains come in and capture that material and make it go round. So it's either manufacturers, remanufacturers, catching that value, having some increasing repair businesses for those appliances. But at the very end, you will have a recycling and beyond that, a metal working industry, for copper and for all the other metals, also recovering that material and bringing it back into the cycle. So it's a matter of delaying that quantity, but the material will come out.
Broadly, Louise, if you're a CEO of a copper company, should you be concerned about the urban mining trend or the circular economy trend? I've interviewed a lot of CEOs in the past 12 to 18 months, and they raise a very good point that we're going to need a lot more copper for the electrification trend, but still we're seeing an increase in attention to recycling. If you were running a copper company, how would you look at this thematic?
Well, the copper demand has been increasing very fast in the past year. So even if you were to recycle all the copper that's available today for recycling, you would still need a very sizable amount of the market to be met by mining. So if you have at the same time an increasing demand and efforts to extend the lifetimes of those products would keep your recycling also down. When you're putting up all of that new equipment, that material tends to be primary because you don't have old equipment to get the material from. So as long as the overall demand keeps growing, we will see an increased need to deal with those discards because they're either recovered for their material content or they will be, they will end up in some landfill somewhere and become a problem instead of a resource. And even if you were to catch all of that, there will be plenty of room for primary copper there. As a matter of fact, there's a necessity for it. And there tends to be an either or discussion around primaries versus recycling. And I think we need to just be cognizant of the need for both. So we do need a strong recycling, and recycling will need a lot of attention in the future because the mix of products to recycle is getting more and more complex. So it's getting more and more difficult to actually recover that material. And not only for copper, if you look at Luke's example of Tesla moving to LFP, recycling an LFP battery is a much less profitable proposition than recycling an NMC battery. Just because, try to get that value out of phosphate compared to nickel and cobalt. So there's going to be a lot of effort needing to go there, but there will be a need for a lot and responsible primary supply for copper as far as we can see it.
And do you see the skill sets that the primary producers have being complementary to recycling? That is to say, if I'm a copper miner, should I be looking at recycling?
At some points, they do meet very well. So you have a lot of smelters do include secondary materials, will tend to be high grade in their anode ovens. You have smelters that are dedicated to recycling, to secondary copper. As you go further away from the metallurgy step, then the skill sets tend to differ. So of course you need to take some material and make it into smaller pieces. All of that, that is common to both recycling and mining, but the complexity that you're dealing with is different. So when dealing with ore versus dealing with an ever-changing stream of stuff that we've all thrown out.
Gotcha, thanks. We've got a few questions, so let's dive into them. And the first one is for Christina. Christina, an audience member asks, to what do you ascribe China's loyalty to copper versus the United States and the European Union?
Okay, it's an interesting question. China is generally more conservative in terms of using alternative materials, and the reason for this is a more firstly, if there is a certain if the power supply does not work, I'm just trying to say it in a way that it's expressive. If the power supply doesn't work, then it is also personalized. Some people will be personally responsible for it, and there is a less, it's a more risk-averse alternative material choice in China, based on the political and also the social mandate given to companies like electrical distribution companies. And there's also, to a certain extent, it's a more conservative society as opposed to the US. And the US has a much stronger cost pressure in the market, a much stronger competition as well, which emphasizes the cost pressure. So this is the reason why this difference exists. And of course, as China moves on to a new business model, which is more focusing on consumption, we expect this a certain convergence between the models.
Gotcha, thanks. Luke, I want to follow back up on something you had mentioned. How does the copper demand from power electronics compare with demand from other powertrain components, such as motors or batteries? That is, my car versus my electric vacuum.
Yeah, so we've done a few studies on copper demand within, I guess, the main components of a powertrain. And within an electric vehicle, if we're looking at where most of the innovation's focused, it's, the battery, the motor, and the inverter. So within a battery, we have done a study that came to the conclusion of about 40 to 50 kilograms of copper for, say, a 50 kilowatt hour battery. So for a Hoover, that would be slightly different, because you have a much smaller battery of the order of half a kilowatt hour, something like that. But within the electric vehicle, you're looking at 40 to 50 kilograms. Within a motor, so copper is really essential for the magnet windings. So the electromagnets that help produce the torque for the vehicle to move. Depending on the motor type you're looking at, you can have a permanent magnet motor or an induction motor. Most electric vehicles are converging on permanent magnets. That takes about 10 kilograms to 20 kilograms of copper per motor, depending on your model or the market you're in. When we compare this to power electronics, in the study that we've done, we were looking at about 500 grams for a silicon IGBT inverter from the 2019 Nissan Leaf. So, half a kilo, you're looking about a 60th of the copper from the overall vehicle, looking at those other components. So it is less, but copper is nonetheless very essential. We're seeing a shift towards copper within the power modules themselves, because there's an increasing trend for things like power density, and copper helps improve the thermal performance and so on. So it's less, but it's nonetheless important within power electronics.
Awesome, thanks, Luke. We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to toss the last question to Peter. You had a great presentation on COVID. I think it's fair to say COVID was a huge inflection point for everyone, but especially the copper industry, given the context of today's conversation. And you had a lot of specific granularity in your presentation, Peter, on where demand would go. We certainly have seen prices increase due to a variety of factors, but I'm wondering if you could talk sort of just a little bit about how psychologically you feel the industry is doing now. Do you feel a lot of optimism right now amongst the industry in terms of where copper demand is going? I know you were granularity and with a lot of the detail, but if you could just sort of talk about, psychologically where you see demand going, or could we sort of, if we have sort of another wave, could we sort of be right back where we are? I'm sort of wondering if you could throw it forward as sort of a last, to close this out here on where you see copper demand going. Post-COVID.
For me?
Yes, sir, yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, I think the signs are very definitely for more copper. So the copper people are right. The reason that it might be held up are third wave virus, very, very dangerous. It's happening at the moment, and look at what's happening in India. The reasons for them all are, for example, hydrogen. When they get the hydrogen prices right, that's going to be a problem for copper, because particularly in vehicles, because hydrogen has some advantages over copper and some disadvantages. I understand. Psychologically, I think the trading problems which the Americans, particularly the automotive people, have been having with chips, quite simple chips, they can't get them, and so they're holding up large numbers of cars waiting for components to come. That must be very dispiriting for them, and it means that along with Biden, they're trying very hard to solve the problem. I don't know if you know this, but one of Biden's new little giveaways was to allow the post office some money to buy 100 electric post vans.
Yes, yeah.
His idea is not that that'll be enough for them, but the idea is that they'll get them, they'll like them so much that they'll buy lots more. And I think that's been his policy all the time, to give little tips for people to try and get them into the idea of the thing, and then make a winner of it by them buying a lot more.
Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of our panelists. We're at time right now. So thank you very much for being with us, for sharing your expertise and your insight as to where copper demand and supply is going in the coming years. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ernest.